Let's just start broad here. I'd love to hear you give your take on this idea of the searchable Earth. I think that's a really cool idea, and it is kind of a default explanation that I start to kind of go to when I'm explaining people like what Earth observation is all about. So, what is this searchable Earth to Satellogic and to you? What does that mean?
Yeah, I think when you canvass the industry and you look at some of the legacy players out there, I refer to their archive as their own time machine, because they can go back in time and look at the Earth at any day, um, in some cases at any point, going back all the way to 1999. It's kind of whenever the first commercial images were for sale or released to the public. So, some of these companies have time machines that are over 20 years old, some 10 years old. And in the case of Satellogic, our time machine started in April of last year. So when you do start to build this archive of data, and the industry starts to, the industry has its archive of data. I think that's when you can start asking questions. You can start asking questions like, well, um, are the things that I'm seeing on the Earth, in the way that I want to search it, the questions that I ask are the changes I'm seeing cyclical? Are the changes I'm seeing seasonal? With the ag sector, you want to know is what's the impact that climate change may be having on seasonal harvests? What's the impact, on at this particular stage in growth of a particular crop? um, and looking at it from an environmental perspective, we see a lot of runoff, right, or a lot of in estuaries or areas where freshwater meets saltwater. A lot of that pollution is carried down from the freshwater stream and then is dumped into the ocean. We can start to look at that turbidity over time, right, or how turbid is the water? What's the composition of the water at those particular locations? And those are just a couple of the ways that we can tap into a searchable Earth and make sense of what we're seeing from space over time.
Yeah. That's actually sparks new thinking for me, like automatically, like the idea of the time element. I had never articulated that, but I guess I had kind of implicitly been trying to explain that. But you bring it up in a good way. Like it's time. Like the archive is a huge part of the data, and seeing things change across time, because it's like, well, don't we have a scan of Google Earth? Like we see the Earth, right? But it's like, well, the Earth is changing, right? And that happens across time. So I think that's a good important point just to set the scene, is like that archive gives us data across time. It's not just one snapshot. Um, and that's when it becomes really useful. And so we at Satellogic, you have an Earth catalog, right? Like a whole scan of the Earth.
Mhm.
And I think the short-term goal is to make that a weekly scan. How is that going? And I know the goal is also to scan it every day. So where is that? Where's Satellogic on that effort?
Yeah, sure. So each satellite that we have on orbit, we currently have 17 in orbit. We'll be launching 5 more in April and 4 more in June. But right now, all of our satellites maintain the capability of imaging the Earth in multispectral, hyperspectral, and full motion video. And today, just since April, we've been able to image the landmass of the Earth twice over in hyperspectral. So we already have the Earth covered with hyperspectral data twice over. In terms of multispectral, we're getting there. And I think you'll see, on our a lot of the press releases we've recently had is, we've improved our design of our next gen satellite. We initially thought we'd need 300 satellites to be able to image the Earth every day. But it turns out we only need just a little over 200 satellites to be able, with our next generation design and just some tweaks in design, to be able to get that daily remap or daily coverage of the Earth. And we anticipate having that established by 2025. We're looking at getting to world weekly remaps, or weekly coverage of the entire surface of the Earth in multispectral by 2023, by the end of next year.
That's really cool. What kind of detail are we talking about? I guess with the video and the multispectral, and like sort of what's the resolution there, if that's the appropriate word?
Yeah, so the native resolution on our current model is 99 centimeters, and then we can run a super resolution algorithm and deliver that image at 70 centimeters. So 70 centimeter ground sample distance, if two objects are 70 centimeters apart, you can tell indeed that those are two distinct and separate objects.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Very, very powerful. Yeah. So that's kind of that frames like, okay, the data capture and what's kind of happening. Okay. So we've got this searchable Earth, which means we're scanning the Earth. We're going to be doing it every day eventually. We've got 17 centimeters as our resolution, so it's highly detailed. And you touched on a few points there already about some of those downstream use cases, but maybe we could spend a little time unpacking a few more of those in terms. And let's start with today. Like, who is using this data today? And yeah, what are some of those use cases? You spoke a bit already about some of the kind of forestry stuff with the estuaries and the water. What else is there going on?
Yeah, I think if you look at this, from a what's the total addressable market? I think that the TAM, or the total addressable market, is growing daily. As the price of imagery decreases, right, more and more industries and more companies are figuring out ways to use imagery from space as a commodity, right, as another data point in their decision-making process. And right now, I think when I look at some of the new adoption, or what my boss refers to as the new space market versus the old space market, some of the fun and cool new space markets are the gaming industry, autonomous vehicles, right? So if you're gaming, right, and you want a realistic version of the Earth, you could, with something like a daily update of what's going on the Earth, you can see wherever your avatar, your character is, what the Earth looked like yesterday, or maybe 4 hours ago, right? If the process is could be that quick. And more seriously, the autonomous vehicle market, because self-driving cars are here, and right, and it's not going to go away. Self-driving, anything really, self-flying drones, and that entire industry relies on new and up-to-date information. If construction changes, then that that model needs to be fed that new information. And I've often said that it's incumbent upon the industry to do the sense-making aspect of it, to make sense of our data and then deliver that in a nice, neat package, so that customers can easily understand and integrate that data into their workflows.
Okay, cool. And so this is where I'm starting to think about this idea of like the vertically integrated, like, Earth observation company. It's like a mammoth task. I'm just thinking about all the pieces that Satellogic is kind of taking on, and it's mind-boggling. I mean, it's like the can we break that down in terms of what it means to be vertically integrated as an Earth observation company? And just to tease that out a little more, I'm talking about kind of the hardware creation, getting it to space, get data capture, and then everything else. So could you take us through that, maybe starting with just, okay, we need to build this satellite, right? So then what? And maybe you can start there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So in true form, being vertically integrated, we do everything in-house, as much as possible. So everything, from building the payload, the bus, getting as far into the supply chain as we can, to have autonomy over design, um, and operations. So all the way down to holding, patents on our optical payload and machining our own parts, um, all the way to, flying and operating the satellites on orbit, and then taking the downstream imagery and running, basic analytics on it. I think for advanced analytics, we're still working with partners for more advanced analytics, but the goal is to be, a fully integrated geospatial data analytics company.
And okay, so just the way you kind of said that made me think like, okay, so you're indeed moving towards more vertical integration, and you guys want to bite off as much of that as you can possibly chew and expand to be completely, I mean, you are, but like for example, the analytics, you want to be able to do more analytics, super high, like the very challenging kind, right? So you're even moving towards vertical integration further, as opposed to maybe separate, letting that go a bit. Okay, yeah, interesting. I just wasn't sure which direction that you would take, but very cool to hear. And so, how just a little thing there, like how do you get it the hardware to space? Like, I'm pretty sure there's not that many competitors doing launches, but is it like on a SpaceX rocket, or how do you get the small sats to space?
Yeah, SpaceX is our primary launch provider. So we don't do launch, but just about everything else.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it just boggles my mind to figure out like all the things you would do, because to me it's like, well, obviously you have separate teams who focus on these things, but so I'm assuming that you guys really find a value in being able to be vertically integrated, and that gives you something special, like, because why else would you do it, right? So what does that do for you that you think is special to be that vertically integrated instead of just picking one piece of this?
Sure. Yeah. I think, first and foremost, it's being able to offer the end result, or the output, or the product, or the pixels in our case, at the most economical price point possible. So being vertically integrated, you can realize economies of scale and bring down a lot of that cost. So in line with the vision of Satellogic and democratizing access to satellite imagery, if you ask yourself if what we're getting ready to do, or who we're getting ready to talk to, is going to increase the access to satellite imagery, if the answer to that question is yes, then we're going to do it, right? We want satellite imagery in the hands of the many, not the few, which has historically been the case. We view, or our position is that, satellite imagery should be a commodity, right? Something is like you turn on your tap and water comes out. You hit our API and you start getting data, right, at a very economical price point. And that's going to have to be the case if we're going to solve a lot of the issues that are facing the globe today. People are going to need near real-time, high fidelity data to be able to make decisions that are going to impact the globe. So, you can't do that if the cost of that data is at a price point such that it's reserved for just a few governments that can afford it, right? It needs to be affordable for everyone.
Right. Okay. Right. So the vertical integration is giving opportunity to help bring down those costs and have like an in-house one-stop experience there. Do people or organizations, businesses ever kind of take one piece of the Satellogic experience and then run away and do the rest, and what I mean by that is like maybe um, they use your hardware, or they're asking for help managing the satellite fleet that they want to put up, or their small sats. So how is Satellogic kind of connecting with other people, other companies, and is it always a full in-house experience, or is there some partnerships going on where people are using kind of part of the overall Satellogic like offer?
Yeah, I think I'd go back to that question, right? Is what we're getting ready to do going to increase the access, of more people to satellite imagery and geospatial data? If the answer to that question is yes, then we will pursue it. And if that's through partnerships, great. If that's in the case of testing hardware or partnerships for that aspect, we do have a third bay on every satellite that we refer to as the hosted payload bay, where we allow companies or governments or R&D institutions to test their technology on orbit with our satellite. So in that way, we could potentially, with a partner, unlock a new use case, or test a new technology on orbit to see if it makes sense to commercialize it, things of that nature. But I think the entire ecosystem benefits, right? The ecosystem benefits if more people are doing analytics, if more people are testing new technology on orbit, because we'll find out something that'll benefit the entire ecosystem.
Yeah. So is this idea of the third bay on the satellites? Is this what I'm kind of hearing when I read about like satellite as a service? Does that mean anything to you, where people can kind of use that piece of the satellite and have their own way to test data? So is satellite as a service a word that means anything to you at all, or am I barking up the wrong tree there?
Well, I'd kind of separate those two, the hosted payload and satellite as a service. I would say our hosted payload program is more of it's a low risk way to test your technology on orbit, right? You incur a lot of risk, right, with space. Space is hard. It's unforgiving. It's a very difficult environment. It's hard to get to. So if you can find a partner that can put whatever it is you're building or whatever it is that you want to discover in space and assume most of the risk for you, right, then that becomes a good business case. And so that's what we've tried to do with the hosted payload program. In terms of space as a service, or in some cases, constellations as a service, which is what we can offer, I think that's a very good way for governments that haven't traditionally been able to get to space. That offers a sort of a low risk way to start a space program, to have dedicated time on our constellation, where we could image your country, we could image your area of interest, and provide that imagery to you. And you think about some of the middle tier countries, right, that have either haven't been able to carve out a budget for space, or perhaps they're too rich to qualify for foreign aid in order to stand up their own space program, and they've kind of fall in this middle category. Constellation as a service or space as a service, which several of us in the industry offer, would be a good low risk way to get into space, for your own domestic agenda.
And so, with you being focused, obviously very focused on global business development, is that mostly, well, who is it? And is it governments mostly, or is it, would you say you spend most of your time working with private companies? And what's the mix there? I'm kind of curious, because traditionally the largest consumers have been traditionally the largest consumers of of spatial data and sort of satellite imagery have been governments. And
Mhm.
so what does that look like for you now? Like, and government versus kind of private sector usage when you look at the world and who you're working with?
Sure. I'd say globally, just looking at the government market, there's still a lack of supply. It's still a supply demand issue. With if Satellogic, Planet, Black Sky, Maxar, Airbus, all of their roadmaps were 100% successful about what they want to put in orbit and when they want to put it in orbit. Look at that time frame, and you're still going to have a lack of supply. That's how much demand there is for satellite imagery. So I think the industry is in a really good place right now. And as I said, as the price point comes down, and as our industry starts making more sense of the data and bundles that up in a way that's easily ingestible or easily integrated into day-to-day commercial workflows, we're seeing that addressable market grow as well. So it's not just for the large oil and gas companies or for the massive agricultural conglomerates who have been the traditional big players. It's going to be for your small businesses, your small and medium businesses, your local farmers, and everyone in between. Everyone in between your Fortune 10 to your local municipality, right? Using your civil engineer that sits at City Hall and does city planning. It's going to be for everyone.
Yeah. That idea of commoditizing it, commoditizing satellite imagery is coming up again as you say that. And if it so to meet that demand, right? Like that so that's really interesting. Like, okay, so we know there's big demand for this, like, and even if everyone meets all their targets to put these new satellites out, like it looks like the demand is still not going to get reached. And so what if you okay, actually I want to backtrack to kind of set up this question, which is how you said that Satellogic started building their data archive in April of last year, so 2021.
Correct.
How long was the up ramp or sort of how long was that a creation in the making? How many years did it take to kind of get things to that point?
Sure. Yeah. So the company actually was founded in 2010, in Argentina, and over the course of that decade, between 2010 and 2020, we largely operated in stealth mode, perfecting the technology, getting it right, and building an economical satellite that would be able to generate and provide affordable satellite imagery. So, reinventing the satellite, right? Just from the ground up, really. And over the course of 2010 to 2019, we launched 3 prototype satellites, again, to perfect the tech on orbit. And then in 2020, we launched this. In 2020 and 2021, we put up 17 satellites.
Okay, you're right. So it's been a process in the making for sure, and the 2010 was a different place and a different time for the industry, and so what if you were starting today, like you're a small sat company who wants to start scanning and they've got a specific use case in mind, perhaps. What do you think would be different starting today? And we've already touched on some of the points that I think you would bring up here. I'm assuming it is a better time it's probably easier to start now than it was. What can you say about that? Like for a satellite company who is going to start today, like what looks different today than it did in 2010?
I'd start to look at different places in the spectrum. right. And when you look at the recent UN report that was published about 1.5 degrees Celsius versus 2 degrees Celsius, and the criticality of where we are now and the decisions that we're making now, um, then you need to look at greenhouse gas emissions. You have to look at that. And today there's not many assets on orbit that looks at greenhouse gas emissions, especially at the fidelity that's needed to do rigorous analysis that'll have the fidelity and the teeth behind it for decision makers to feel confident about making difficult decisions regarding emissions. So yeah, if I were giving advice to a new company, I'd say look at different parts of the spectrum, right? There's a company out of called Satellite View that's starting to look at thermal infrared. I believe they just received a recent round of funding. That's exciting, right? It's exciting to see, the thermal signatures of the Earth all over the Earth. So, you have GHGSat, with the greenhouse gas detections. So I think there's room there. But back to my earlier comment, space is difficult. It's an unforgiving environment, and even though the barriers to entry are lower than what they were in 2010, significantly lower, launch costs are coming down, right? The supply chain is expanding, so there's more vendors building more components to choose from. So that's bringing the bill of materials down, costs down. So our industry is trending in the right direction to grow the space economy. That's for sure. But in terms of our niche, right, Earth observation, yeah, I would say look for that sort of that part of the spectrum that's not being utilized right now, or not being analyzed right now.
What do you see? You were at Digital Globe, you were at Maxar, you're at Satellogic. This is your world, and it's a place that a lot of people don't know anything about, and it's growing and becoming more and more kind of consumed, and like you said, soon everyone, even small companies, not just the top 10, Fortune 10s, like you said, it's like soon it's like everyone's going to have democratized access to this, and there's going to be much greater accessibility, and that's kind of a big part of the mission at Satellogic. So it's going to become more familiar to people. But at this stage where you're standing, what do you see about the world and where it's heading that you think is unique to your perspective, and that perhaps most people maybe don't see? Is there anything that you believe or that you see happening, based on your experience in this industry, that you think is perhaps contrarian, or sort of not seen by perhaps people who just don't have that experience, like most people? I wonder if you have anything on that.
That's a lot to unpack. Let me do my best here. Well, I think the universal truth is that there's going to be more data rather than less data, right? So that's it's going to become one of those inputs into most of the smart devices that are interconnected all over the planet. My earlier point about the commoditization of data and the sense making of it, I think it bears repeating. I think it's incumbent upon the industry to do most of the sense making, right? We need to make sense of, like, what does this spectral signature mean in a hyperspectral image? Or grandmas and grandpas don't speak in hyperspectral, right? It's not a language known to the masses, right? And even multispectral imagery, right? Red, green, blue. it's not a known thing. It's not the language on Main Street. So
Right.
the industry needs to kind of normalize that and shape the narrative, and use different language to drive increased adoption. And whether that's data bundles or delivering insights, but it's going to be a full-fledged effort from our industry, not just in terms of collecting the right kind of images and data, and doing the performing the analytics on it, but also messaging it, right, and
Mm-hmm.
marketing it.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be like a full business spectrum endeavor, industry wide, to get that kind of adoption.
Yeah. It's sort of making me think, where exactly is all this going to go? Is a bit like asking those people sort of who made the printing press, like, what are people going to do and write about? It's like, well, you could say a few things and try and predict, but I'm realizing now that as I explain, what I do to people, and what the whole Earth observation space is really all about, it's like we are seeing the beginning of what will be more and more and more to come. And so that is where the human creativity and all these great companies are going to make all kinds of creative and ingenious ways to solve problems with that. And I think the whole Satellogic, the idea of just increasing that access is sort of like laying the groundwork. It is sort of just a foundational piece to allow for all of almost like a renaissance of new creative solutions to kind of spring from that. And that's sort of what I'm seeing right now. And yeah, very, very interesting. Yeah, I think that's where that conversation kind of took my mind. And I think we took a good route there, and I'm really like grateful to have you on. And there's a lot to unpack with these conversations and dive into. But I think that was great for me, and I hope that people also enjoy it too.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.